Hey guys, quick disclaimer before this video gets started. When any game has had a remake, I'll be talking about that version of the game. If you don't like it, tough, it's my channel, I'm just gonna have to deal with it. Sorry. As well as that, I will only be covering the mainline 1 through 8 games. So, hope you enjoy. Resident Evil, also known as Biohazard in Japan, is a survival horror video game series mixed with resource management in the form of limited inventory spaces and storage boxes made by Capcom. The series was first created in 1996 for the PlayStation 1 and is still going strong to this day. A remake of the fan favorite Resident Evil 4 has been announced, and DLC for 8 is, at the time of recording, close to release. As well as that, there's also been a confirmation that Resident Evil 9 is also in development. With the series as long-standing as Resident Evil, it's had many games over its 26 years of being a franchise, and we're going to be talking about the games numbered 1 through 8 in this video. Without anything more to say, let's get into the video. Resident Evil began development in 1994 by Team Horror and was released in 1996 for the PlayStation 1. It was then remade in 2002 for the GameCube. The game was directed by Tokaru Fujiwara, who inspired to achieve what the Famicom couldn't. Originally planned for this game to be on the Super Famicom but switched to the PlayStation 1. The original plan was to have the characters be able to free roam in a 3D environment. This would have required high polygon counts, multiple AI partners using motion capture, but that put way too much strain on the PlayStation. So they had to tone down their ideas, and instead of 3D environments, they had the camera switch angles to give it more of a cinematic feel. With the technology available at the time, they could only make a room with 8 still images. This led to some rooms in RE1 having to be split into 2, like the entrance hall and the dining hall, which were originally going to be one room. The playable characters also had radically different names, except for Jill, who just had a surname change. Originally, the cast was going to be cybernetically enhanced, but this was changed to be akin to the real world. Originally, there was going to be a wider variety of zombies, like child zombies, but that was scrapped because come on, I really shouldn't have to say why. Finally, the game's going to be called Biohazard in the West because there was already a game and a band called Biohazard in the West, so the devs had an internal contest for an English name. Resident Evil was chosen, and Senior Director of Communications and Community Chris Carmer said, "I thought it was super cheesy. Can't remember what I thought was a better alternative. Probably something stupid about zombies." But the rest of the marketing crew loved it, and ultimately we were able to convince Capcom Japan and Mikami-san that the name fit. The story of this game is that on the 24th of July 1998, Bravo team was sent to investigate the killing spree. They lose radio transmission during the mission. Due to this, Alpha team are sent in to investigate, and they are attacked by rabid dogs. They try to return to the helicopter, but their pilot had already left without them. They see a mansion in the distance and head that way. You then choose your playable character. If you choose to play as Chris, Barry fails to reach the mansion, but if you play as Jill, Chris fails to make it. From there, you begin to investigate the mansion with your partner, depending on who your character is. On the side, you're also looking for Captain Albert Wesker, who went missing. Now let's get to discussing some gameplay. As I mentioned in the beginning, Resident Evil is a resource management survival horror game. You'll explore areas you go to in the game and collect items. You'll find objects like healing items to recover HP, bullets to shoot zombies, as well as multiple types of guns and other items that are used to open paths forward. Of course, with only 6 or 8 inventory slots depending on who you picked, your character obviously doesn't have enough space for all your items, so you either need to use them, discard them, or, the way you should be playing, use the storage boxes found in the safe rooms to store your items so that you can use them later in the game. So what are these safe rooms? Well, safe rooms are rooms that have no enemies in them, so you can have time to heal, reload your guns, save your game, as it's the only place you can do so, but you also need ink ribbons to save your games, which are items you'll find multiple of in the mansion. You need at least one on you to use the typewriters, which is what you use to save your game, so I recommend keeping a surplus in supply in the boxes. You should also keep your saving to a minimum. 1, so you don't run out of the ink ribbons. 2nd is because you're being ranked, and one thing that goes towards your rank is the number of times you save. The less you save, the higher your rank is. Once you beat the final boss, you win. So who is the final boss? Spoiler warning, skip to this timestamp on screen to be safe. Throughout the game, you start to learn that this was all a setup so that STARS, a special division of the police department in Raccoon City, can be wiped out. Eventually, you find a fountain that hides a secret entrance to a lab, and in this lab, you find evidence that Wesker is a double agent hired by Umbrella. There's a Tyrant, aka a bioweapon, in that lab. Umbrella wants them to wake up the Tyrant and get them the data for it. Wesker escapes, all the protagonists and partner characters reach the helipad, so does the Tyrant, but a rocket launcher thrown to you is able to kill the Tyrant. So what do I think of the game? It's not the worst game I've ever played, but I'm not really a fan of the first game. The camera angles get me kinda turned around, and it changes to different parts of the room, so I always end up getting lost all the time. Even when I'm using the map, I'm not sure where I was going, and I was kind of just wandering around and kind of clicking on everything to try and figure out where I was going. I did like the combat for the time it was released in. I like that you're able to aim your gun up, down, and straight ahead. I also like the voice acting and story setup for the rest of the series. The successful release of RE1 selling 2,750,000 units and the remake adding another 2.33 million and becoming a bestseller in the UK, it's clear that this game was going to get a sequel. Enter Resident Evil 2, which first released on the PS1 in 1998, but then was remade for PS4, Xbox and Steam in 2019. For footage I'll be using the 2019 remake, but I will be talking about the original game and the development. Resident Evil 2 was originally going to be a completely different game under the same name but scrapped back in 1997. This is known now as Biohazard 1.5. Not wanting to take a chance on a game they were unhappy with, they had started the development from scratch and the game was still released next year. Take note, Square Enix, I'm still salty about the Kingdom Hearts 3 wait time. I know I missed most of it because I only joined the series in 2017, but still, many of 1.5's elements were changed, like the character Elsa Walker. She was completely removed and replaced by Claire Redfield, the younger sister of the previous game's protagonist Chris Redfield. Some characters remained like envisioned, like the other playable characters such as Leon Kennedy and Sherry Birkin. Leon's story remained mainly the same. The only changes were that Marvin was going to join you, as well as help out you and your ally you meet later in the game. Speaking of that other ally, her name was originally going to be Linda. She was originally a scientist, but she also had her other job, and you know what we're talking about if you've played this game. Elsa's story, who became Claire's story, was quite different. It had characters like John, who was a civilian who was arrested in RPD, and Roy as a cop, who worked there and then becomes a zombie. The zombie is then killed by John, once saved by Elsa. Some other small changes to the characters were made. Annette Birkin was planned to have a mutated form and presumably boss fight, but that was cut. Chief Irons was planned to show up in both stories, but in the final game is absent from Leon's, only making an appearance in Claire's. As well as that, William Birkin was going to wander around the factory, but does not in the final game. The story is split in two different characters. And for reference, yes, I'll be basing this off the remake in case anything sounds off. Leon and Claire meet at a gas station that's been overrun by zombies and get away in a cop car and drive to RPD where it is safe. They end up in a crash but escape yet separated. Whoever arrives at RPD first meets Marvin and starts to find their way underground, shortly followed by the second character. Claire meets Sherry and agrees to help her find her mother, and Leon meets Ada. Sherry is kidnapped by Chief Irons when Claire reaches the underground, and Leon meets Ada there, and after running into each other a few times, although never actually said, they agree to work together. After each player escapes, they take their partner to the sewers. Claire saves Sherry and that's where they end up, and Ada escorts Leon as there's a secret Umbrella base there. Ada gets hurt, needing Leon to come save her, and Sherry runs away from a monster while Claire's unconscious. After reuniting with their partners, they go to a lab. Sherry's infected, so Claire's looking for a cure, and Leon's looking for a cure to give to Ada for FBI reasons. Both characters run into Annette multiple times. In Claire's story, she helps cure Sherry as she's her daughter. So good to see her finally actually fucking doing something. She is a terrible mother. Claire and Leon make their way to a high-speed train under the facility to escape. You fight the final boss as either character and then you're done. Talking strictly about the 2019 remake gameplay. I love it. One of the best in the series. It looks stunning, controls well, voice acting is spot on, story is very good in my opinion, as well as Leon and Claire being high up on my favorite characters lists. But the game isn't all perfect. There are of course some continuity issues, like needing to unlock the path underground as both characters. Logically speaking, it should remain unlocked after either Leon or Claire unlocks it. As well as that once the shutter to the underground parking lot is raised, regardless if it was Leon or Claire who raised it, it should stay raised for the other character. Despite it all, I still love the game for its fun, stressful, and spooky experience. Now I've added Mr. X stalking you the whole time to make you shit your pants. With Resident Evil 2 being released, the most logical place to take this game is Resident Evil 3. Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, also known as Biohazard Last Escape in Japan. This game is unique in the fact that it's both a prequel and a sequel. The first half is a prequel to Resident Evil 2, and the second half is after Resident Evil 2. A remake for this game was also released in 2020. With the first two games having similar gameplay, the devs originally wanted to branch out with Resident Evil 3 and do something a bit more indie. The original plan was to explore a large city scarred by the outbreak. We wanted there to be burning buildings and distant screams, as well as enemies spawning and unpredictable events to scare the player rather than just being there. As well as that, he wanted the protagonist to pass out so the events of RE2 could play out. The original title was going to be Resident Evil 1.9 or 2.1, being on either side of 2. When they woke up, the city would be repopulated with stronger enemies, for the protagonists would have to lose their resources to prevent players from feeling like they were just getting too used to the setting. When they presented the game to the supervisor, it was renamed Biohazard or Resident Evil 3. The indie aspect was also completely rejected and reworked into Resident Evil 4. They originally toyed with the idea of having a new cast of characters like they did for Resident Evil 2, but brought back Jill Valentine, who was originally going to be the protagonist of another canon game called Veronica, which was developed alongside Resident Evil 3, but they just replaced her with Claire Redfield. As I mentioned, the first half of the game is a prequel to Resident Evil 2. A few months after Resident Evil 1, Jill has been laid off from STARS. Umbrella is also out for revenge and releases their latest tyrant, codenamed Nemesis, to stop her. It bursts through her wall to try and stop her, and Jill barely escapes and needs to get out of Raccoon City. Eventually, Nemesis corners her and Jill is saved by an Umbrella employee, Carlos, who is completely unaware of Umbrella's bad side. Jill is made go to start the whole city's power so she can escape via subway. Meanwhile, Carlos is made go to RPD from Resident Evil 2 and find one of the scientists to cure the virus. The train crashes thanks to Nemesis. Jill fights them but makes her go unconscious. Carlos finds her and brings her to the hospital. While they are there, they learn the scientist making the cure has been killed. As well as that, the US government wants to completely sterilize, yes, this is in quotes, sterilize Raccoon City. And by sterilize, I mean... Carlos wishes to Umbrella HQ after curing Jill. When she comes around, she follows him. Jill makes a cure, kills Nemesis, and stops the traitor in their group. In terms of the 2020 remake, it plays very similarly to Resident Evil 2. The only difference is sub-weapons were removed. In Resident Evil 2, you had a menu for sub-weapons, this being knives, grenades, and flash grenades. In Resident Evil 3, they're just put in the same inventory as everything else, so you have to equip them like you would a main gun. Speaking of the knives, in Resident Evil 2, the knives had a health bar. This is because if a zombie grabbed you, you could stab them with a knife and then grab it back if you killed them. These knives had a health bar. After the health bar was depleted, the knife would break and you'd no longer be able to use it. In Resident Evil 3, you keep the same knife the whole game. Other than that, it's just a case of not fixing what isn't broken. While I do like the remake, it doesn't hold a candle to the RE2 remake. RE2 is so much longer of a game than RE3 remake. As well as that, there was cut content from the original, like a whole clock tower area from the original was removed. I still enjoy playing Resident Evil 3 Remake, but it's not my favorite in the series. Resident Evil 4 was released on January 11, 2005 on the Nintendo GameCube as a temporary exclusive. It was part of the Big Five, a collection of 5 games made by Capcom to be GameCube exclusive to promote the GameCube. The only problem is, each game on the Big Five was either a failure or only timed exclusive. One of the games that was a timed exclusive was Resident Evil 4. It got put on the PS2 on October 25th of the same year, only 9 months after being a GameCube exclusive. Since then, it's been remastered in HD for the 15th series anniversary. It is on Xbox 360, PS3, PS4, Xbox One, Steam, and the Oculus. At the time of this recording, there's also been a remake announced for the 24th of March 2023. This remake will be using the RE engine used for 7, 8, 2 Remake, and 3 Remake. Speaking of the original RE4, the project began in 2000. The plan was to take a Resident Evil game and use advantage of modern gen technology. The team was very ambitious in the beginning. The script had to be completely thrown out and restarted, as well as that the character models in the game were using more RAM than the GameCube could actually load. Shinji Mikami, the producer of the previous games, was put under serious pressure by Capcom higher-ups, saying that they would cancel the series if this game did not sell well. So yeah, little to no pressure here. First problem, script. Their normal scriptwriter was working on another game, Hallucination. The decision was to commission a script from outside. They kept some elements of the old script, like the protagonist being Leon Kennedy, the fact that he's a government agent now, but the nature of his work has changed. Afterwards, they changed their model so they took up less RAM, but let's discuss the story in more detail first. As I mentioned, Leon is now a government agent. He gets a mission from the president to rescue his daughter, who was abducted on her way home from college. The last known location is Spain, so Leon sets off to Spain by himself to find her. He travels to a village and meets the main antagonists, Los Iluminados. They are simple Spanish farmers infected with a parasite, allowing the parasite's ruler, Lord Sadler, to mind control them. Leon is knocked unconscious and has the parasite eggs injected into him. This parasite will start to slowly take over his body. He meets a Spanish cop named Luis, and with the help of him and the love of my life merchant, yep, that's his name.
What are you buying?
Leon finds Ashley, but that's not the only mission. We need to get her home. We first learned though that she also had the parasite eggs injected into her. So you travel through the country, taking down mutants and punting this really puntable kid. Like, oh my god, just look at his face. Doesn't he have the most puntable face you've ever seen? Eventually reach the end with the help of friends? And cure both Leon and Ashley of their infection and then get her home safely. So how's the gameplay? Well, if you played the games as they came out, this would be the first game to use red laser aiming. Before now, you could only aim up, down, or straight ahead by tilting the stick, but now you have a full 3D plane you can aim in. As well as the 3D aiming, you may have also heard me mention Merchant.
What are you buying?
Fucking love this man. Merchant is a traveling merchant and aids Leon on his quest. As a merchant, he is in this for money. Enemies in this game taking inspiration from RPGs will often, but not always, drop items. This may be bullets, healing items, or last, the most important and most common one, money. You use this money as well as money you get from selling treasure you find around the map to buy items from the merchant. You can also buy upgrades for your guns, and you'll also be able to buy new and better guns, as well as more inventory space from the merchant. You can find treasure by keeping an eye out for glistening lights on your adventure, as well as items that look a bit too detailed to just be background decoration. They also added reaction commands. If you shoot an enemy, you can possibly be able to kick them if you're quick enough reactions. Speaking of reactions, this game was one of the earliest to use QuickTime events. This would require the player to mash the buttons repeatedly, or press the buttons at the right time. This game is one of the reasons QuickTime events and third-person shooters are the way they are today. Of course, there were games before Resident Evil 4 that did QuickTime events and third-person formula, but RE4 does it in a way that feels so natural that everything in terms of the combat just feels right. It's one of the first games that definitely made them catch on. So how did I like Resident Evil 4? Well, if I had to rank them, I'd say personally that this would be my second favorite, giving it slightly to Resident Evil 2 Remake because it's such a great reimagining of Resident Evil 2. But yeah, this game is a very, very, very close second. Resident Evil 5 was released on the PS3 and Xbox 360 and personal computers in 2009. It was then ported to Steam in 2015 and then all modern consoles in 2019. And this was a very ambitious title for the time, as the 6th generation of console was coming to an end and the 7th generation was coming in. This was especially challenging as many people integral to Resident Evil before now had left to join Clover Studios, like RE4 director Shinji Mikami. With the number of people who loved Resident Evil 4, it only made sense to retain that gameplay style, right? But we'll get to that a bit later on. Another way they planned to change the game was set it during the day, as prior Resident Evil games had been set during the night. The first reason for setting the game during the day was that the game setting was Africa. They wanted to show off the setting. The second reason is because now that the game's on the PS3 and 360, they can include little details in the environment they couldn't before. Another gameplay change they had was adding co-op. The main reason they didn't have co-op up until now was that the main belief this would ruin the tension, but if one of the two players was trapped and needed to be saved, that tension would be returned. The story is that Chris Redfield, who is part of the Bioterrorism Security Assessment Alliance, is sent to Africa to stop the smuggling of a bioweapon. He has his new partner Sheva from the BSAA West African branch. It turns out locals in the area are being infected by a more potent version of Las Palgas, the parasite from Resident Evil 4. On a mission they find a memory card that contains images of Jill Valentine. The only problem is, Jill died. When hunting Albert Wesker, she died in the effort to catch him. They continue their mission for many reasons, collecting the Ouroboros, the parasite, and apprehending Wesker, and finding Jill. As for the gameplay, well, this is quite a departure from Resident Evil 4. Let's start with the AI. If you're not playing co-op, the other character is controlled by AI. They do not like to use certain weapons. In my blind stream playthrough, which you can catch on my channel, I gave Sheda all my grenade-based weapons and she just would not use them. She only used the guns. And this is a big problem because when you're blind to the game, like myself, you don't know she's not going to use them. As well as that's balancing. This game has many moments when they send way too many enemies that are overpowered at you. Specifically the chapter in the factory and the second to last chapter where they send two almost impossible enemies to kill, and I streamed my whole first blind playthrough if you want proof of this yourself. And yes, I know this problem isn't exclusive to 5, 4 also had it, but it was nowhere near as aggravating as in Resident Evil 4 as it is in 5. This game also brings back money and shop mechanics, but it's done through the menu. This is done in between chapters, or after you die, instead of through a character like the merchant in RE4. I don't know why they didn't have a merchant-based character though, and I'm not saying it had to be the merchant specifically, But RE4 and 5 are structured in the same way, of multiple chapters broken into smaller parts, so they could have definitely had a merchant. Anyway, I've said my piece on this game, let's just move on. After Resident Evil 5, the team decided to make 6 their biggest title yet. It started out as a single hero story, but then became a multiple hero stories further into development. Each story is planned to have a different style. The Leon story is more akin to the original trilogy, where you're investigating a case and trying to solve it. Chris's story is more like Resident Evil 5 and more military focused. Jake's is around the fear of being pursued, sort of like Resident Evil 3. Ada was added afterwards to solve any lingering questions the players had. In Leon's story, he and his new partner Helena team up because they have a lead in the cathedral they can get info from. This lead ends up being Helena's sister, but she needs to die because she's already infected with the C virus, the zombie virus for this game. Hannigan, a returning character from Resident Evil 4, contacts Leon as she's still working with the government, but their call is interrupted by Simmons, the I am totally not the villain of this game, but I'm absolutely totally the villain of this game. So after both us and the cast of the game figuring out he's the villain in like less than 5 minutes, we instantly try to start pursuing him, so we fake our deaths and go to China. You know, the logical way. Meanwhile, in Chris's story, he left the BSAA he was a part of in Resident Evil 5 because he was responsible for the deaths of many men, and now he's just a drunken waste of space. Yeah, this is just a setup for an Adam Sandler movie if I've ever heard of one. Pierre's, a member from his team, comes to see him and convinces him to rejoin the group and just end bioterrorism, just like that. Jake is a member of the South Slavic Edonian Liberation Army. Nailed it, got that all in one take. He teams up with the now grown-up Sherry from Resident Evil 2 because his rare antibodies could lead to a cure from the zombie virus. Unfortunately, they have a creature chasing them down. They end up in China for spoiler reasons, but that monster follows them all the way here. Ada also has her own story in this game, but this is just to tie up any lingering questions the player may have. Okay, this story is just a goddamn mess, okay? I had to take a break from pausing it so many times just because I just couldn't process what the fuck is going on. It seems like they're trying to do so many things all at once and none of it just lands. In terms of gameplay, RE6 is a lot like 4 and 5. There are some new twists and additions though. They added an evade mechanic so you can dodge roll out of the way of enemy attacks. As well as that when you're low on health, you can also crawl away from the enemies to try and recover, or you can fire at them with your gun on the ground if you have ammo left. You stay in low health until either you recover yourself, or your partner comes to save you. This was also the first game to include having a right bumper just made for heal if you have a healing item, which is in itself a good mechanic and was even brought back in Resident Evil 7 and 8. But as you can tell from the story, this game is just a mess, and the gameplay wasn't all good new additions. When choosing your gun, you had to use left and right to just cycle through your guns, and this was kind of confusing to get used to, especially coming from the other Resident Evil games. I wanted to keep in mind if it was like Resident Evil 4 and you had to open your menu just to change your gun, but this was just confusing to get used to. As well as that, if you're not using a gun, you have to select what type of weapon you want to use by using up and down instead. I completely didn't know we had a bunch of other weapons we could use until like an hour into the game. As well as that, there's also a shop mechanic in this game, but there's, again, no merchant. And as well as that, this time you're not buying items, you're buying skills. This is just such a strange game to get used to, considering all the other Resident Evil games around it, and you can tell why no other game tried to follow this game's formula. After Resident Evil 6, the old-time fans of the series felt alienated. Now, not counting spin-offs, it had been 3 games since the series had focused on the horror aspect. The horror aspect was the whole reason the series had the reputation it had, instead focused on action gameplay. And the type of action we're talking about is action that would only be matched in superhero movies. In 2013, another action-focused gameplay was pitched, but this was cancelled, and in 2014, the producer of 1, 2, and 5 was called in to begin the new Resident Evil game. He wanted to find a way to cut costs on development, since cost of developing AAA games was expensive, but this is when 7 almost killed itself. Before the game was set on the right track, it was originally going to be a live service game of microtransactions. After the failure of Resident Evil 6 this would have absolutely killed the series. Takeuchi says in an interview there was a big push in Capcom to make the game people were asking for, and at the time that meant live service. We were being told, make this, make that. It was really hard on directors at the time. Online multiplayer this, downloadable content that, ongoing service games, microtransactions. Make this the Resident Evil game that ticks all those boxes. Everything was going so ultimately wrong that the Capcom president himself at the time intervened, flat out telling them that Resident Evil 7 was not good. The dev team formed a team of 10, and in the first 2 months of development spent redefining the meaning of Resident Evil and what Resident Evil meant to them. They agreed amongst themselves that it's a balance of horror and item management. Online play was ruled out, as a 2-player horror game wasn't practical, as you could tell by RE6. Open world was also turned down, as a constrained setting would add to the tense feeling playing the game. It also allowed them to spend more time on better visuals. Going back even further, Takeuchi's work on the original Resident Evil 1, where the story was evolved around a mansion in the Arcane Mountains, this time he wanted to base the story all around a farmhouse in Louisiana. The team even went to haunted houses and abandoned houses in the Osaka district and recorded their experience. The unease they felt is what they wanted to capture the most in this game. The art team was given great freedom, which they enjoyed, but with the lack of a script caused them to do many revisions to their designs. They used photogrammetry, which turns photos into 3D models for games. Since the enemies were planned to be humanoid, they took photos of the actors and prosthetics. The game was originally going to be built on the Unity engine, but Takeuchi suggests they build their own engine designed specifically for RE7 and they could reuse for later games in the series, leading to the birth of the RE engine, and it definitely paid off because the RE engine makes beautiful games. One of the developers they suggested they make RE7 VR friendly, because you know, VR and horror goes together so well. The game had to get delayed and they tried hard to make it an October release to capitalize on the Halloween season. Oh hey, like me with this video. But unfortunately that couldn't be met, and the game finally got delayed to January 23rd, 2017 when it finally came out. The story revolves around a widower, Ethan Winters, whose wife, Mia, has been presumed dead for 3 years. This is until one day he receives a video message from her warning him to stay away from her and the Baker house. Wanting to save his wife, Ethan goes there to save her. When you get there, you notice something is up. Mia is seeming to go through these episodes where she goes crazy. You're made to fight her, and after the fight, a creepy old man knocks you out, and in a barely conscious state, you see him drag you and Mia into the house. When you wake up, you're tied up to a chair and meet the family of Jack, Marguerite, Lucas, an unnamed old lady, and little girl who is absent from the scene. After seeing a cop die, don't worry, not Leon, you have the opportunity to escape. Once you do, you're being hunted by Jack. Once you escape the house, you need to find items to cure Mia with the help of Zoe over the phone, who is another member of the family. The keys to the room with one of the ingredients is held by Marguerite, and Lucas has the other. Once you get their ingredients, you go solve the mysteries around with Mia and the tragedy of the Baker family. First, let's talk about the first person. I don't think this is too different from a design choice from the past to be jarring for old fans. I think it was a nice change of pace. It's clearly something that stuck on, with Resident Evil 8 also being first person. It also made sense with the VR version. This is one of the best return to forms the series could have hoped for. The combat got a revamp as well. You have your usual gun and knife play, but now you can also guard enemies' attacks to reduce the damage you take. It's a very nice addition to add some action into the horror gameplay. This game is very seriously popular because it also got DLC when the original plan was to not give it any DLC. Resident Evil 8 is the most recent numbered game in the Resident Evil series. The production of Village began 3 months before the release of Resident Evil 7. The game was pitched as a continuation of Resident Evil 7, both narratively and in style. The game was codenamed Village early on. The codename Village stuck because the producer worried about the game being called Resident Evil 8 would seem off-putting for newer fans of the series. This is why the game was officially named Resident Evil Village, with the 8 being visible in the word village. They also wanted Ethan to be the protagonist again. The main reason was so he wouldn't be as much as a blank slate as he was in RE7. The original story revolved around an old village and a castle. The dev team also toyed with the idea of dual protagonists like Leon and Claire from RE2. This would have presumably been Ethan and a second protagonist who survived in the Middle Ages. This was obviously dropped though, and Ethan was made the main protagonist. Oh my gosh, main protagonist, what is up with me? This was dropped and Ethan was made the sole protagonist. The team also knew from the beginning they also wanted a gothic horror inspiration and stuck with it. Castle Dimitrescu was something they wanted to include from very early on, and there's even early concept art depicting it as a large house but was made a castle. They also wanted a fantasy-inspired cast of villains because that fit with the gothic horror style they were going for. The Lycans, the main common enemy, were designed after werewolves. Dimitrescu and her daughters resembled vampires. Salvatore Moreau was a horror spin on mermen. Yeah, I definitely prefer this type over Moreau. In this game, Ethan and Mia are moving on from the events in Louisiana. Thanks to the help of Chris, the couple were located to Eastern Europe. In between games, Ian and Mia had a baby girl called Rose. One night, Mia is shot dead. Rose and Ethan are being taken into custody by the BSAA. While on the road, the truck with Ethan ended up in a crash and Ethan sets off to search for his daughter. He gets captured by the deity and worshipped by the village Mother Miranda. Ethan learns she has Rose and he needs to fight his way through 4 lords. This game is a very good successor to Resident Evil 7. Firstly, the crafting system for Resident Evil 7 was expanded. In this game you can craft a lot more than you could have in Resident Evil 7. As well as that, when you guard, you can also have a chance to push enemies away. They also brought back one of the best mechanics from Resident Evil 4, the enemy drops and the merchant. Meet the Duke. There isn't much we know about him like the merchant. In Duke's store you can buy supplies like healing items, ammo, and craft recipes. You can also upgrade your guns in the same 4 areas you could have in Resident Evil 4. Firepower, capacity, reload speed, and rate of fire. There's also treasure hidden around the village which works in the exact same way. You try to look for things out of place, examine it, and then bring it back to the Duke. There's also animals you can find around with fish and meat. If you have enough of a certain ingredient, you can give it to the Duke and he will cook you an upgrade. This will do stuff like increase your health, reduce the damage you take while you're guarding, etc. I feel like this is a much better system than the antique coins in Resident Evil 7 because the antique coins could be hidden anywhere and everywhere. The animals in this game tend to stand out a bit more, so it's easier to find them. Although that's not to say getting all the ingredients is easy, because it's definitely harder to find some than others. As well as that, you might need multiple of an ingredient to actually be able to buy the upgrade. As well as that, the map in this game is also an upgrade. It's a lot more like the maps in Resident Evil 2 and 3 than it is in 7. In Resident Evil 7 it was just grey and looked like a floor pan. In Resident Evil 2 and 3, the map was color coded. It was red in areas you hadn't finished searching yet. It was blue in areas you found all the items in, and it was grey if you hadn't been there yet. Everything else remained unchanged, but that's fixing what isn't broken. And with that, that is all my views on the Resident Evil series. Thank you so much for coming by and sticking with me. It really means a lot to me. If you like Resident Evil, obviously comment below your opinions. We can all have a discussion about it. Just be respectful of everyone. As well as that, if you like my channel, you should let me know what video you want me to do next. I am always open to suggestions, just let me know. You should also follow me on Twitter. You should also subscribe to the channel. You should also follow my cosplay Instagram, which is brand new. I haven't done this before, so you should also go follow that, because you guys like my cosplaying, so you should go follow it. And with that, I think I have talked about everything. I thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye!